It's a minute past our time, and I'm just going ahead and get started. So, welcome to our bi-monthly Bridge Book Club. Today, we're discussing The Other Me by Sarah Zachrich Jeng. Today's event is hosted by Bridge Michigan. So on the call today, we have Amber DeLynn from Bridge Michigan, Catherine Dougal, and myself, Josiah Foster. Bridge Michigan is a nonprofit, nonpartisan news source covering issues that matter to you and the community in Michigan. You can subscribe for free. You can visit bridgemichigan.com to subscribe to Bridge Michigan. Also, if you're a current Bridge Club member, people who have donated to Bridge over the last year will get a number of benefits, including a free ebook. So the book we're discussing today, you get that automatically for free. You can become a member by visiting the link today, and we will drop that link in the chat soon. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by the author, Sarah Zachrich Jeng, and I'm going to give a full introduction of Sarah momentarily. But we're so incredibly honored that she was willing to show up and join for this discussion of her novel. It's so good. It's a thriller sci-fi novel. Takes you through the turns, and I'm just so excited to discuss it. So today's schedule is going to go like this. We're going to introduce Sarah, and Amber will lead the discussion with Sarah about the book for about 40-ish minutes. And then if you have any questions, feel free to post it in the chat, and we will moderate those, and we will hand it over to Sarah. Then we'll conclude exactly at 1 p.m. And we will be recording this discussion so you can share this with your friends anytime soon. So I want to introduce Sarah. So Sarah grew up in Michigan and always had a flair for the morbid and the mysterious. For her dad's 35th birthday, she wrote a story entitled The Man Who Died at 35. She had a brief career as an aspiring rock star before she came to her senses and went back to school and became a web developer. Sarah now lives in Florida with her family and 2 extremely hyper rescue dogs. The Other Me is actually her first novel. I want to thank you for being here, Sarah, and now I'm going to turn it over to Amber.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Josiah, for that excellent welcome. Sarah, we are just so honored, like Josiah said, to have you here as a special guest in our Bridge Book Club discussion. So as Josiah said, we do these every other month. We focus on books that are connected to Michigan in some way, and we were delighted to choose The Other Me as our selection for February. So I am just curious, my first question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose to write The Other Me?
Yeah, so as mentioned, I grew up in Michigan, right outside the Flint area, and I grew up just loving to read and write. During my 20s, I didn't write very much because I was playing in bands, but I came back to it during my 30s when I needed kind of a creative outlet where I wouldn't have to hang out in bars till 2 a.m. because I had a child. So The Other Me, I was kind of looking for ideas to write an original novel, and I was at a place in my life where I was, thinking about my own life choices and what I wanted my future to look like, and it just kind of was a natural outgrowth of that. And I also wanted to do something where that looked at kind of the tension between having creative work and needing to support yourself financially.
Absolutely. Well, we're so glad that you explored those themes, because I know I can speak for myself, but also a lot of our readers who I've heard from, that this was a book that we all really enjoyed. Awesome. So I read in your biography that this is your first novel. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to become a novelist and how the experience has been so far?
Yeah. So like I had needed that creative outlet. And I actually, when my daughter was old enough that I had some time to myself to have a hobby, I had started writing fan fiction, because I had been writing like nonfiction before that, but I wanted to write fiction, but nothing was really grabbing me. So I got into online fandom, and that was just like a lot easier to get into than trying to take a whole idea and just construct a novel right away from it. So I did that for a couple of years, and finally I, got to the point where I felt like I had the confidence and the skill to construct a story and write an original novel. So it took me a few years to do that. And the experience has been really, really good so far. I mean, I love the process of writing. I've always loved that. And as far as publishing goes, it's really been eye-opening. Like, my experience has been really positive. Definitely publishing in a pandemic. I am told, I've never published a book not in a pandemic, so I'm told that's way different. I haven't gotten to do an in-person event yet. Like, I hope one day that I will. But but yeah, like, and I've really loved, my favorite part has been connecting with readers and connecting with other authors.
That's really interesting. I hadn't considered that, in-person events have probably been really difficult to do. So what an experience, especially as a first-time novelist. I'm a little interested, if you don't mind me following up, and sort of getting sort of your first, your feet wet in fiction through the online fandom community. Did you find that to be a supportive space for sort of helping you to sort of hone your craft?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Because I mean, you have kind of a built-in audience for the fandoms that you're writing. And so they're just like super enthusiastic, and they just, cheer you on all the way. So, that's definitely a good place to get your feet wet as like getting back into fiction writing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one thing that we've heard from readers, is oftentimes our readers are very interested in the process. So, and I love to hear from each author sort of how it is that they've sort of honed their craft. So thank you for sharing your story on that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, I don't read a ton of sci-fi, but I am a sci-fi reader. And I'd be curious to know a bit about your experience as a sci-fi writer. So this has been a genre that's not always welcoming to women and people of color, though it's exciting to see the genre diversifying. Did you always know that your first book would be in the genre?
So yeah, when I started writing The Other Me, I didn't really know what it was going to be. I've always read a lot of cross-genre literature. Like, my favorites have been things that bring in fantastical or supernatural elements to commercial fiction or literary fiction. Like, one of my early favorites was Margaret Atwood. And I love like Carmen Maria Machado and like Lauren Bukes, and people who have like kind of a normal world sometimes, but they just bring in like weird stuff. So I knew when I was writing a book that it was probably going to do that. And as far like, I love what's been happening in sci-fi the last recent years. I mean, I think all the Hugo nominees, the majority of them were women or authors of color, and that's been such a long time coming. Yeah, because like sci-fi is the genre of possibility, right? So you need different voices and diverse voices to tell those stories and see those different possibilities. But yeah, like when I started writing The Other Me, I thought it was going to be kind of like sci-fi tinged commercial fiction or literary fiction. It was a lot slower paced. It had a different ending. And then it kind of evolved into something like a thriller sci-fi-ish thing.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. As you know, this is our Bridge Book Club, and all of our books are related to Michigan in some way. So I'm curious to know if it was important to you that the book was set in Michigan, or at least for part of Kelly's life. And sort of why did you choose the state as the setting for at least one version of Kelly's current life?
Right. Part of it was just a practical decision. It was, a place where I spent the first 21 years of my life. So I was very familiar with it. So I wouldn't have to do a lot of, geographical research. But also, I mean, I felt like it would be easier to convey kind of the vibe of being there and living there. And it was just like, I love books that have a sense of place, especially if the place isn't, the expected New York or some famous city. I love books that are set in just like smaller towns and places that you wouldn't think of. And conceptually, I mean, it just made sense to me to have my main character returning home to a place that had been my home. Because to some extent, Michigan's always going to be home to me.
Absolutely. And you could tell I really did have that sense of place. Like it felt like I was like, you wouldn't have had to tell me that you were from Michigan. I would have known because it felt very familiar to some of the smaller towns like the one I grew up in. So
cool.
you definitely accomplished that. I felt like I'm going to turn to some questions a little bit more about the plot. So Kelly's friendship with Linnea is such an important part of her identity and sort of the current timeline. And in the story, friendships seem to play a really important part in the current timeline, the previous timeline. I just was curious about sort of what you were trying to convey to readers about friendship and its role in personal identities.
Yeah, so I mean, the people that we hang out with absolutely inform how our characters develop and who we become as people, especially when we're younger, right? Because once we get into our teenage years, like our friends are the people who know us even better than our family in a lot of cases, and they know like our authentic selves. And they're also like they're kind of, you know, both mirrors and windows. They can reflect who we are. We, you know, emulate each other. We kind of egg each other on, get each other into different things, and they can, you know, encourage our development in getting into like positive things, or they can hold us back. So they have like just this huge influence on us. And I mean, as far as Kelly, the character of Kelly, like I think Linnea and her friend Katie from home represent like two different sides of her, right? Because Linnea is kind of her role model, while Katie is her like anti-role model. And Linnea kind of helps her out in the art world and encourages her that way. And she's someone that she wants to emulate. And she's also more supportive of Kelly's authentic self. Whereas Katie just kind of wants her to be this, you know, wants her to be like her, like, you know, when are you going to get pregnant? That kind of stuff. One thing I will say for Katie, she didn't like Eric, so, you know, points for that. but yeah, I mean, friendship and the people that you surround yourself with they just have such an effect on who you become as a person.
Absolutely. Sort of related to Kelly's Michigan life, I did notice that, you know, there are various points throughout when Kelly's sort of trying to figure out what the heck is going on in this timeline, that she really sort of expresses gratitude and sort of a change in attitude about the time she gets to spend with her family, you know, her parents in particular. And in sort of this current life that she's living, I was wondering if it was important for you to sort of show the ways that she grew and matured throughout this current timeline.
Yeah. So yeah, I didn't want her Michigan housewife life to be completely bad. Like I wanted there to be a lot of ambivalence around that. And because in her artist life, she's very disconnected from her family of origin. And it's the result of a decision she made when she was pretty young. And the inertia of that decision just kind of carried forward into this distant relationship she has with her family. And she's kind of getting a second chance with her family, with, you know, her mom, and definitely her mom, but even her dad and her brothers and Eric's family. I wanted to show like a different dynamic there, because they have this warm relationship, but they also kind of, a lot of them go after their dreams, even as they're having children or whatever. So with his family, things kind of coexist a little more than Kelly maybe thought that they could. But yeah, I did want to show how she kind of gets back to her roots a little bit and finds a way to make her roots coexist with her ambition.
Definitely. So speaking of sort of the sci-fi and thriller aspects of the story, I'm curious, you know, the other me doesn't have a super optimistic take on some of the technological advancements that could potentially be out there. I hope this one doesn't exist yet, but honestly, who knows? I just am curious, does this align with sort of your personal views on technology, and what do you think readers should take away regarding tech with after reading?
I mean, I would say I'm like skeptical about technology rather than pessimistic. I mean, I'm a web developer in my day job, so, you know, yay, internet. But yeah, like technology has a lot of benefits for people, and it's like it's improved people's lives so much, just the ways that you can go out and find your community, even aside from just the like life-saving aspects of it. I do think that, the benefits don't accrue equally. They tend to go to the people who already have the most privilege. And if you're not careful about ethics, which we usually aren't when developing technology, it just ends up kind of reinforcing the existing structural inequalities. And also, like, as your power increases, so does your potential for destruction. So I mean, I think it would be very bad if there was a time machine that was widely available, or even available to, the Elon Musks of the world, because it would absolutely be misused. And I was super relieved when I was doing my research to see that almost every physicist who's, take I ran across was like, yeah, time travel into the past isn't possible. It's not going to happen. I mean, never say never, but I don't know. I think we would know.
I'm wildly relieved to hear that.
Yeah.
Kind of on that in that same vein of that portion of the story, I found myself like, I felt like a cold hand around my heart when it's like you realize that sort of like the true like nature of the manipulation of Kelly, that like this has happened a number of times. And I was so full of dread, so feeling like, okay, she has to relive life again with this full knowledge from age 17, not knowing that whether when she turns 29, shortly thereafter, she's going to be thrown potentially right back into a deadly situation. So I'm just curious about sort of how you mapped out the kind of concluding section of the book. Did you always know how it was going to unfold? Like, how did you go about it?
Well, pretty early on, I knew that she was going to end up back in her youth. As far as like mapping it out, it was like I had to draw like this. I drew this ugly diagram with like arrows going back, and I had spreadsheets of everything that happens in her life and Eric's life, with like a tab for each timeline. It was a lot of like organizational work. And yeah, as far as like, I mean, she has this foreknowledge, right? But she doesn't really, I think she had just enough foreknowledge for it to mess with her, because she doesn't know how things are really going to play out. Even though she knows the future, things could always happen differently. So I think that uncertainty kind of makes her almost not be willing to be passive. She's got to kind of make her bold choices and go after the life she wants. And I think we see that at the end with her artistic success. And I mean, she realizes that she's not going to be able to maybe have everything she wants right then. Like she's not in a romantic relationship. And I mean, who knows what Eric's deal is? He's still in her life, and he seems okay, but who knows? But and I don't know. I mean, I think none of us have foreknowledge. We're all kind of living on the edge, right? So we all kind of have to just live our lives with the information we have.
That's true. That's true. I did receive one question from a reader, very related to the last one I asked you. So I feel like I should bring it here because he emailed it to me this week. I just was curious, like in your mind, we end the story on Kelly's 29th birthday. In 2 weeks, is her life different, or does she go back into this? What, if you were writing a sequel or whatever, like do you have an idea of what her path would be? I mean,
Adam's still out there doing his genie thing, so I think they're gonna at least have to deal with that. Yeah, like I think the story would get bigger and kind of shift more into the tech aspects of it, rather than being that just the personal story.
Sure, makes sense. Speaking of Eric, do you think readers should feel any empathy at all for Eric's character?
So like the earlier drafts actually had his point of view. It was almost half of his point of view, which made for an extremely long book. So it kind of traced his life from the time he meets Kelly in junior high up to, I believe, the point where he goes back to her 17th birthday. And it kind of traces him, developing this fixation on her, and kind of gives us the why of why he would do this and his own self-justification for doing that. And some of the early readers I had were like, this creates too much sympathy for him. And I ended up agreeing with them, but it was really helpful to get his point of view, because, he doesn't think he's doing anything wrong. But yeah, I think even people who, hurt other people very badly and do not great things, they're not always irredeemable. I think everybody can learn to do better. And I wanted to, at the end of the book, I wanted to leave that possibility open for Eric. Obviously it's never going to happen between him and Kelly. He's, burned that bridge, but maybe he can bring that into his future relationships.
Definitely. I liked that he was in a different relationship at the end, that, hopefully he had sort of learned some of these things,
Yeah.
So that was, that it did, as a reader, I enjoyed seeing that. And you hope that he'll sort of continue down that path. Obviously there are overarching messages in the story about gender and about free will and self-determination. Were those important themes for you to have in the book? Were there any others that you were very proud of, sort of making this part of the narrative?
Yeah, all of those themes came in, like identity and toxic masculinity. Obviously, it's not always violence, physical violence, and yeah, just self-determination, and kind of how also just the randomness of the universe, right? Sometimes things happen and they have huge effects on our lives, and we can't do anything about them.
Absolutely. Well, I have a handful of reader questions that I will turn to in just a moment. But before I do, I'm just curious to know, you are a web developer. This is your first novel. I'm curious to know, is writing going to continue to be sort of part of your future? If so, what are you working on now? Would you ever write another novel? Just all of those things.
Yeah, so I'm in the editing stage of my next novel, which is supposed to come out in 2023. And it's about two women who used to be friends, are now no longer friends, and what happens when their lives intersect again. And I've pitched it as kind of The Talented Mr. Ripley meets Freaky Friday. So
that sounds fantastic. I'm excited to read that. That's very exciting. So would you say it's in the same genre or something different?
It's in that kind of speculative suspense category for sure.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you for being willing to answer my questions. If it's okay, I'd like to turn to some reader questions now.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So we have quite a handful here. So I'll just kind of take them as I've received them. I had Lawrence, one of our readers, he said, as an Ann Arborite for over 50 years, he laughed out loud when you characterized Ann Arbor. I think Kelly says that it's heaven on a stick. He's curious to know if you have a relationship with Ann Arbor, if you spent any time there, and kind of any history that you have with Ann Arbor.
Yeah, well, I went to the University of Michigan for 2 years, actually. So I lived there as a college student, which is, I'm sure, quite different from living there as not a college student. But I loved it while I was there.
Fantastic. Another reader wondered, what inspired you to choose a time machine type of topic? Why did you choose sort of that as your vehicle for telling the story?
It was always, that's kind of how the idea popped into my head. Because I've always been interested in, doing your life over and, going back to your youth and living your life over and, knowing what you know now. So that theme kind of came to me as part of the story, and it was kind of part and parcel of it from the beginning.
Very, very interesting. One reader was curious, and if you're not comfortable sharing, it's totally fine. What sort of fan fiction you created? If there were certain fandoms that you followed.
Well, I probably won't say the specific fandom because it's kind of a small one, but I did write 3 novel-length works. So, and it was very you know, usually they focus on a certain couple. So I did
Okay.
that, and it was fun.
Very cool. One reader was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, sort of in your mind, the difference between sci-fi or magical realism or fantasy.
Yeah, so I mean, magical realism is like specifically Latino, I think. And I mean, sci-fi, it's such a wide such a wide genre, really, because like, yeah, like The Other Me is absolutely not what they call hard sci-fi, where, you know, all the science is explained and everything's very laid out. It's more just kind of soft sci-fi, which deals with more with the concepts. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's such a big tent. And I just, like, when I was writing, I wasn't really thinking about genre that much at all. I was just kind of like pulling in whatever I wanted. So in the future, I might keep more to genre guidelines, but I always like works that kind of go outside the lines.
Definitely, it's interesting. I'm sure that there are readers throwing the additional questions in the chat, but I just wanted to note that if anyone else has questions, please feel free to keep throwing those in the chat here. We had one reader that they weren't familiar with the expression or the sort of the reference to yellow wallpaper, and they were wondering if you could just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's a story that a lot of people read in school, I think, and it's about, you know, it's from the point of view of this woman who she's had kind of a mental breakdown, and she's basically kept in this room by her husband and her doctor because they think she doesn't need to. She's like a writer and she doesn't need to work. She doesn't need any intellectual stimulation because that's bad for her. So it ends, like, the story ends with her basically, you know, having a complete mental breakdown brought on by her being shut up in this room and not being able to express herself creatively.
Sure. Very, very resonant theme for The
Yeah.
Other Me, for sure. I'm curious about, there are a couple questions about sort of also about the characters, and then a few that are sort of bigger picture about writing. So one reader was wondering, why did you include an alternative trajectory for Kelly's mom's cancer and her health?
I guess I wanted there to be kind of higher stakes. Yeah, it was one way to increase the stakes, because in her other life, you know, her mother is much sicker. So that's kind of a reason for her not to go back. And it's kind of a signal to her that maybe going back is not the like knee-jerk reaction thing that she should do. Yeah.
Okay. A reader named Jackie said that she'd like to compliment you on the amazing depth of the characters. She really felt like she knew them. And at the end of the novel, it just really left her wondering about the future of those people. Like, that there's really nothing to stop Adam, the bad guy, from going back in time and making and causing even worse havoc in an alternative future. She's just curious if you had any thoughts on that, if you had thought about sort of his trajectory.
Right. Well, I did have like an original ending where he does come back and he walks into the gallery and they see him and it's like dun dun dun. But yeah, I haven't like done any specific work on what happens afterward because I kind of moved on to other things after I wrote this. But yeah, it would be just really interesting to explore that and what happens, because basically anything could happen, right? They have a time machine. So anything they do could be undone. That's kind of the nature of a time travel story. So you could really mess some stuff up.
Totally. It sounds like this is a hopeful question. This reader was curious about, have you had any talks about optioning the book for a movie or anything along those lines?
There's been, you know, some conversations, but nothing I can be specific about.
Fair enough. Well, we're all hopeful. We have our fingers crossed.
Same.
This is a fun question. This reader said, you talk about how, like Kelly, you've had to find ways to have sort of a creative outlet outside of your day job. And they're curious about which of Kelly's timelines do you see more of yourself in?
I mean, both really, because I spent my 20s. There was a time when I was like, oh, I'm going to be a musician and I'm going to make a living off of that. And then, I realized that that probably wasn't going to happen. So I needed to find some way to support myself. Um, and now I have kind of like a quieter life. I have a family and a job and everything. So I definitely see myself in both of those lives.
Very cool. Do you still play and whatever? I don't know which instrument you play.
I played drums most. I also played bass. I don't really play anymore. I do a little bit, but not writing's like my main thing now. But
sure,
I always say I'm retired.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Another reader wondered, it seems that Eric has had many tries going back in time, and they're curious about, like, was it in your intention for us to think that Kelly remembered those? Were those sort of breakthrough memories that she would have occasionally that seemed like they didn't fit with either timeline?
Yeah, that's what those were. And like the kind of mechanism that I came up with for that happening was, they're within Genie, within the company, they're kind of troubleshooting the time machine. Mm-hmm. So every time they do that, it kind of results in more breakage of the space-time continuum.
Sure. This question says, did any of your friends or family who've read the book recognize any parts of themselves in your characters? Did you borrow any parts of your reality for your fiction?
I mean, I didn't like take anyone's personality. I used a lot of names of, people that I knew, either first names or last names. I just kind of grabbed them out of the air, like, oh, I remember this person. But it wasn't like their personality or them as a person, or even, their physical looks or anything. I tend to do a lot of more like compositing than, because I don't want to like offend anyone, obviously. But I mean, yeah, like I think everyone puts parts of themselves in their lives and things that they know, people they know, into their writing.
During the writing process, we get a lot of questions like this, so this is an interesting one for, I think, a lot of our participants today. During the writing process, which parts of the story took the longest to write or to edit?
Which parts? I mean, there were parts that just kind of flowed out. Like I think the opening scenes were the ones that changed the least. The parts that took the longest were probably the middle, where Kelly is kind of sleuthing and trying to figure out what's going on. I had to kind of come up with things for her to do during that time. I'm like, okay, so how would she try to find out what's happening? And also just the scenes with the family, with both Eric's and her family, coming up with, those conversations and all the interaction. I had to do a lot of more organizational stuff there.
Sure, that makes sense. That trying to figure out what would be realistic for her to help her get some clues to try and put that together. That had to have been a complicated sort of sense of like, how is she going to figure this out, because she's now in this unfamiliar space. I think I may have grabbed all of the questions that we have so far. Oh, there's one more. Mm-hmm. This reader is wondering, how did you come up with the idea that time travel would come from an app versus like a more traditional time machine? Were you just, putting like a modern take on it, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I used to work for kind of a web development startup, and I've always been interested in startup culture because it's so weird. So I wanted to bring that in, and yeah, just like having something on. It seems like any new technology like that people want to bring to the masses is going to be on a smartphone. So so that was kind of my thinking there.
Definitely. I know that you brought in that in Kelly's Michigan life, she's a runner. There's a reader who'd like to know if you are a runner personally. I
hate running. Like I hate it so much. My parents were both runners, so I used to like when I was much younger, but it's like not my form of exercise that I prefer. But you know, it seemed right for Kelly.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I think that those are the questions that we have today. Is there anything else that any questions you were hoping to answer today that you want readers to know?
Well, I'm just so glad that everyone has enjoyed the book, and I mean, I hope it kind of makes people think about their own life choices, I guess, and just what's brought them to this point, because it's always just super interesting to think about that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so very much for joining us today. This has been a really excellent discussion. I really enjoyed it. There is someone who is saying that we didn't get to the IPSY question. They wanted to know what your beef was with IPSY.
Well, I lived in Ann Arbor. No, I'm kidding. No, IPSY is great. I don't have a problem with IPSY at all. I mean, I was kind of like kind of trying to illustrate that rivalry between Ann Arbor and IPSY, because people in Ann Arbor, I would always hear about them like kind of looking down their nose at IPSY, and that was kind of a way to poke fun at that, more than trying to insult Ypsilanti.
Totally. As our office is in IPSY, so we were like we got to stand up for IPSY here. So I'm glad.
No, y'all are great.
Thanks. Well, again, I just want to say thank you so much. There are readers who are putting their compliments to you into the chat. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much
for writing this great book. We all look forward to reading your next novel whenever it hits the shelves. And I also just want to say thank you to all of our Bridge readers for joining us this afternoon. I think it's been an excellent discussion. Your questions have been great. We do look forward to announcing our next Bridge Book Club selection. We'll be reading our next book in April. So keep your eyes on bridgemi.com for our next Bridge Book Club selection announcement, which should be soon. We did record today's discussion, so it will be shared with all of you in Bridge this week. So if you missed it, or if you know someone who missed it and you want to share it with them, or you'd like to watch it again, you can catch it there. But that is all we have for you this afternoon, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.